My hand was still inside his when the alarm in my own skull went off. Not a real alarm, a body alarm, the kind my people are born knowing how to hear. Heat, it said. Too much heat. Pull away now. I did not pull away. That was the strange part. I stood there on the landing deck of the outpost, my fingers wrapped around a human hand that felt like it had a small fire burning somewhere under the skin, and I did not move. His name was Corin. He was the first human I had ever touched, and within 2 seconds of contact, my entire body was telling me that something was wrong with him. Not wrong in a small way, wrong in the way a patient is wrong right before they stop breathing. "Good to meet you," he said, and he smiled like nothing at all was happening inside his own chest. "I am Vesta. Among my people, the Krillins, I hold a title that translates roughly as a reader of strangers, though the humans later shortened it to liaison, which I preferred, since it sounded less like something out of an old religious text. My work is simple to describe and hard to do. When a new species arrives at a joint station, I am the one sent to greet them first, to touch them first, to read what my instruments cannot read. Skin tells you things that words do not. Skin had never lied to me before. I let go of his hand as slowly as I could manage, so it would not look like fear, though it was fear, quiet and cold and climbing up through me like water filling a sealed room. "You're warm," I said, because I did not know a gentler way to say it. "Yeah," Corin said, "that's kind of the default setting." I did not understand the joke. I would not understand it for a long time. Where I come from, warmth is not a default setting. Warmth is an event. It is the first sign that something in a body has gone wrong, that a system is losing control of itself. A Krillin running warm is a Krillin in danger. We do not have fevers the way I later learned humans do, small and survivable and almost routine. When our bodies heat past their proper range, it means infection, poison, or the final hours before shutdown. I had spent my whole life reading temperature the way a doctor reads a wound. Heat means damage. Heat means fear. Heat means an ending. So when I shook the hand of a living, breathing, smiling human being and felt heat pouring out of him like a small sun trapped under cloth, my entire body did the only thing it knew how to do. It told me he was dying. I did not say this out loud. I am trained better than that. But I did excuse myself faster than professional courtesy allowed, and I did walk straight to the medical bay instead of finishing the greeting ceremony, and I did pull up every scan we had ever taken of a human body, because I needed, more than I needed almost anything else in that moment, to understand how a species could walk around burning and call it nothing. The scans made it worse before they made it better. 37 degrees. Every single human reading came back close to that number, give or take a fraction. Not one of them read as cold. Not one of them read as calm, not by my definition of calm, which required a body temperature low enough that the mind could slow down and think clearly. By every measurement I owned, every human on that station was in a state of mild, constant, unresolved crisis. And every single one of them was laughing in the mess hall 2 corridors away. I stood in the doorway of the medical bay and listened to the sound carry down the hall, easy and loose, the kind of laughter that comes from people who are not afraid of anything at all. I thought about walking down there and asking someone, anyone, why they were not worried about themselves. I thought better of it. Whatever answer they gave me would not fit inside the shape of anything I already believed, and I did not know yet if I was ready to let it change me. That night I requested a private channel with our senior researcher, an older Krillin named Sethril, who had studied 11 other species before this one, and had never once, in 3 decades, reported anything close to what I was about to describe. "They run warm," I told her. "All of them, all the time." "Define warm," she said, in the flat, patient voice she used when she suspected I was exaggerating. I sent her the readings. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, long enough that I wondered if the connection had failed. "That is not a fever," she finally said. "That is consistent across every subject. That is baseline, I know. Then they are all in continuous low-grade crisis, and none of them appear to know it." "I know," I said again, because I did not have any other words yet. Sethril was quiet for a moment longer. "Watch them," she said. "Do not report anything as fact until you understand what you are seeing. A finding this strange usually means one of 2 things. Either they are dying in a way they have adapted to ignore, or we have been wrong about what dying looks like. I did not sleep well that night, if what my people do can even be called sleep in the presence of an unresolved question. I lay in the cool dark of my quarters, temperature regulated exactly the way my body needed it to be, calm the way I had always understood calm, and I thought about a hand that had felt like it was burning, and a face that had not looked afraid at all. The next morning I went looking for Corin on purpose. I found him in the engineering section, elbow deep in a panel of wiring, sleeves pushed up, forehead shining faintly with something my instruments told me was simple exertion, and nothing more. He looked up when I came in, and did not seem surprised to see me, which I would later learn was one of his more useful qualities. Very little surprised Corin. It was, I would come to understand, part of the same design as the fire under his skin. "You're back," he said. "Come to check if I'm still on fire." "You said that as a joke yesterday too," I said. "I would like to understand it." He set down the tool in his hand and gave me his full attention, which was another thing I noticed about him early, that he did not split his focus the way some people do, keeping half an eye on a task while pretending to listen. When Corin looked at you, he looked at you completely. "It's not a joke exactly," he said. "It's just how we run. Our bodies keep a fire going all the time, whether we're doing anything or not. It's called being warm-blooded. You've got the cold-blooded version, right? Your temperature follows the room." "My temperature follows my safety," I said. "A body that runs hot on its own, without any outside cause, is a body in trouble. That is what I was raised to understand." Corin considered this for a moment, and I watched something shift behind his eyes, something like the first understanding that we were not simply two different shapes of the same idea, but two entirely different ideas standing in the same room. "For us, it's the opposite," he said slowly. "If we stop running warm, that's when something's wrong. The fire's not the danger, the fire's what keeps us steady." I did not have an answer for that. I only had the memory of his hand in mine, and the alarm that had gone off inside me, and the fact that the alarm had been wrong, or at least wrong about him, in a way I had never once considered possible. "Show me," I said, before I had fully decided to say it. He raised an eyebrow. "Show you what?" "Whatever it is that keeps you steady, I want to see it." Corin smiled again, the same easy smile from the landing deck, and for the first time it did not read to me as a warning sign. It read, instead, as an invitation, though I would not have had the language for that feeling yet. Not on that first day, standing in a room full of wires and warm metal and a species I had completely misunderstood. "All right," he said. "Stick around. I think you're going to have a strange week." He had no idea, in that moment, how right he was, and neither, if I am honest, did I. I only knew that something in me had cracked open the moment his skin met mine, a small fracture in a calm I had believed was permanent, and that whatever poured through that crack over the following days would not let me go back to being the Krillin I had been before I shook his hand. I filed no report that evening. I could not find the words yet. Instead, I sat alone in my quarters, temperature perfect, mind perfectly still, and for the first time in my life, that stillness felt less like safety and more like distance, a wall between myself and something I very much wanted to understand. Somewhere down the corridor, Corin's body was quietly burning, the way it always did, the way it always would, and I found myself wondering, with something close to longing, what it might feel like to carry a small fire like that inside myself, and call it nothing at all. The first real test came 3 days later, in a storage bay that had lost its heating overnight. I was not supposed to be there. My duties kept me mostly in the medical and research wings, far from the working guts of the station, but Corin had asked if I wanted to see how the crew handled a cold snap, and curiosity had gotten the better of my caution. So I stood at the edge of a wide steel room, watching frost creep along the walls like a slow silver disease, while 3 humans worked without coats, without complaint, without any of the fear I had expected to see. "Doesn't this bother you?" I asked a woman named Lucy, who was crouched by a broken vent with a scanner in one hand. "The cold," she said, not looking up. "A little, mostly just annoying, makes my fingers clumsy." "Only annoying," I repeated. "Well, yeah. It's not going to kill me in the next 10 minutes. I'll just be uncomfortable until we fix the vent. She glanced up at me then, reading something in my face that I had not meant to show. Why? Does cold scare you? Cold does not scare me, I said. Cold is where I live best. It is warmth that concerns me. Lucy laughed, a short surprised sound, and went back to her work, but I noticed she filed the comment away somewhere, the way Corin had done with my questions, storing it for later instead of dismissing it. I was beginning to understand that this was a habit among them, this quiet collecting of strange facts about each other, as though every conversation were a small piece of a much larger map they were all building together. I spent that week doing the same thing, in my own way. I built a private log, meant for no one but myself, filled with observations I did not yet know how to explain. I wrote that humans slept in short, broken pieces and seemed to consider this normal. I wrote that they touched each other constantly, hands on shoulders, arms linked while walking, in ways that would have been alarming among my own people, who reserve touch for only the most necessary moments. I wrote that their voices rose and fell more than ours did, that their faces moved more than ours did, that very little about them was still, and yet none of it seemed to cost them the calm I had always believed required stillness to exist. Sethril called again on the fourth day, her voice carrying the particular patience of someone who has been waiting for a report that has not arrived. "You have not filed anything," she said. "I do not have anything ready to file. Vestha," she used my full name, which she rarely did. "You were sent to observe, not to disappear into the observation." "I am not disappearing," I said, though even as I said it, I felt the shape of a lie forming somewhere behind the words. "I am trying to understand something before I write it down wrong." "Then understand quickly," she said. "The council wants a preliminary assessment within the week. Tell me at least this much. Are they stable?" I thought of Corin's hand, the fire under his skin, the calm in his face that had never once matched what my instruments told me. I thought of Lucy shrugging off frostbite as an inconvenience. I thought of humans laughing in a mess hall while every reading I owned insisted they should have been afraid. "I do not know how to answer that yet," I admitted. "By our measurements, no. By their own behavior, completely. I cannot reconcile the two." Sethril was quiet for a long moment. "That," she finally said, "is the most useful thing you have told me all week. Keep going, but be careful, Vestha. A mind that spends too long trying to understand something, built differently from itself, can start to lose the shape it began with." I did not know, at the time, how close to true that warning would prove to be. The following day I asked to see one of their medical examinations, and Corin arranged it without hesitation, the way he seemed to arrange most things I asked of him, as though my curiosity were simply another task to be handled, rather than an inconvenience to be managed. Their doctor, a calm, unhurried man named Owen, walked me through what he called a standard physical, explaining as he went in the plain, patient tone of someone used to teaching students who knew nothing at all. "Resting heart rate," he said, pointing at a number on his screen. "Blood pressure. Core temperature, which you've already seen plenty of, I hear." He gave me a small, knowing smile. "Here's the part that might surprise you. All of these numbers go up when we're afraid. Heart rate climbs. Temperature can climb a little too. Breathing speeds up. It's called a stress response. So fear makes you warmer." "Sometimes, yeah, a little." "Then how do you tell the difference," I asked, "between simply being afraid and simply being alive? If your fire runs constantly, and your fear also raises your fire, how do you know which one you are feeling at any given moment?" Owen leaned back in his chair, considering the question with more weight than I had expected. "Honestly," he said, "sometimes we don't know right away. Sometimes your body's already reacting before your mind catches up and tells you why. You feel your heart going fast, and you have to ask yourself, wait, am I scared, or did I just run up some stairs? It's not always obvious." This answer unsettled me more than any reading on any screen had managed to. Among my people, the body was a clear and honest instrument. Cold meant safety. Warmth meant danger. There was no ambiguity to sit inside, no moment of confusion where you had to ask your own skin what it was trying to tell you. And yet here was a species that lived inside exactly that confusion, constantly, and somehow did not seem broken by it. If anything, they seemed to have made peace with the uncertainty in a way I found almost impossible to imagine. Doesn't the ambiguity worry you? I asked, not knowing what your own body means. Sure, sometimes, Owen said, but you learn to sit with it. You learn to keep functioning, even when you're not completely sure what's going on inside your own chest. That's kind of the whole trick of it, honestly. Not being certain, but moving anyway. I left the medical bay that day with more questions than I had walked in with, which had become something of a pattern. Every answer Corin or Lucy or Owen gave me seemed to open two more doors instead of closing the one I had knocked on. I found myself, for the first time in my professional life, deliberately seeking out uncertainty rather than avoiding it, chasing a species whose entire existence seemed to run on a kind of controlled unpredictability that should, by every rule I had ever learned, have made them unstable and dangerous. Instead, they were the steadiest crew I had ever studied. I watched them handle a supply shortage without panic, rationing calmly, adjusting plans without raised voices. I watched them handle a minor injury when a young engineer named Daniel cut his hand on a broken panel, and instead of the frantic reaction I had half expected, Owen simply cleaned and wrapped the wound while Daniel made jokes about his own clumsiness, wincing but never once losing his easy tone. I watched Corin spend an entire night troubleshooting a failing filtration system with no sign of frustration, humming quietly to himself as though the broken machine were simply a puzzle rather than a threat. Each of these moments chipped away at something inside me, some old, settled belief about what stability was supposed to look like. I had always understood calm as an absence, the quiet that remains when danger has been removed, when the body has cooled and the mind can finally rest. Humans seem to have built calm out of something else entirely, not absence, but management. Not the removal of the fire, but the ability to carry it steadily, to let it burn without being consumed by it. I began to spend more time near Corin than my duties strictly required, though I told myself, and continued telling myself for longer than was probably honest, that this was simply thorough research. He never questioned it. He answered every strange question I brought him with the same patient good humor, and slowly, without either of us naming it, our conversation stopped being purely professional and started becoming something closer to friendship, though I did not yet have a word in my own language for what was forming between us. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said one evening, as we sat together in the observation deck, watching the slow turn of stars outside the viewport. "You may." "Does it bother you," he said, "being around us all the time? Knowing your body's basically screaming an alarm every time you get close to one of us?" I considered lying. I did not. "At first, yes," I said. "Every instinct in me insisted that you were all in danger, all the time, simply by existing. It was exhausting, holding that alarm at bay long enough to keep working." And now? I looked at him for a long moment, at the easy, unafraid set of his shoulders, at the warmth radiating faintly from his skin that I could sense even without touching him anymore, a warmth my body had somehow, slowly, without my permission, begun to associate with something other than danger. "Now," I said, "I am not certain the alarm was ever describing you correctly at all. I think, perhaps, it was only describing how unfamiliar you were, and unfamiliar is not the same as unsafe. I am only beginning to understand the difference." Corin smiled at that, quiet and real, and for a moment, neither of us said anything else, content simply to sit together in the warm dark, one of us burning gently and constantly, the other cool and steady beside him, two very different fires finding, for the first time, something like a shared rhythm. It would not last. 2 nights later, the reactor failed, and everything I thought I understood about calm was about to be tested in a way no conversation could have prepared me for. The lights went first, dropping from clean white to a dim, flickering orange, and then the air itself began to change. I felt it before any alarm sounded, a slow drop in temperature that most of the crew would not notice for several minutes, but that my body registered instantly, the way a swimmer feels a current shift before the surface shows any sign of it. Something in the reactor core had failed, and with it, the heating system that kept the station livable for its warm-blooded crew. For me, this should have meant nothing but relief. Cold was safety. Cold was calm. I did not yet understand how wrong that assumption was about to prove itself, not because the cold was dangerous to me directly, but because of what it would reveal about the difference between my kind of steadiness and theirs. The first alarm cut through the corridor lights, a low pulsing red that painted everything in shifting shadow. I was in the observation deck when it started, and within seconds Corin was on his feet, already moving toward the door before the second alarm had even finished its cycle. "Reactor coolant failure," he said, reading something off a handheld display clipped to his belt. "That's not good. That's really not good." "What does it mean?" I asked, following him into the corridor, where crew members were already moving with quick, purposeful steps, none of them running, all of them clearly afraid and clearly, somehow, still functioning. "It means the core's losing its ability to regulate itself," he said, breaking into a jog now, "which means heat's about to become a very complicated problem for everybody on this station, including you." I did not understand the warning fully until we reached engineering, where a wall of monitors showed numbers falling and rising in patterns that meant very little to me, but clearly meant a great deal to the humans reading them. The heating system had failed, along with the coolant loop, and the temperature across the station's lower levels was already dropping fast, faster than any environmental system should have allowed. For the humans around me, this was becoming a crisis in the truest sense, cold enough to threaten their bodies within the hour if it was not fixed. For my own kind, stationed elsewhere in the outpost, it was becoming something different, and worse. My people did not simply feel cold as an inconvenience, the way humans did. Past a certain threshold, our bodies begin to slow everything down to conserve what little internal heat remains, a process our ancestors developed to survive the long, dark winters of our home world. It is called deep stillness, and it feels, from the inside, exactly like falling asleep in the middle of a sentence, thoughts arriving slower and slower until they stop arriving at all. I felt the first edges of it less than 10 minutes after the alarm sounded, a heaviness settling into my limbs, a strange, creeping comfort that whispered that everything would be easier if I simply stopped moving. I had never once, in my life, considered stillness a danger. It had always been my safest state, the place my body went when the world grew difficult. Standing in that failing station, feeling my own mind begin to slow toward sleep while alarms screamed around me, I understood for the first time that safety and survival were not always the same thing. "Vesta." Corin's voice reached me from somewhere that felt farther away than it should have. "Vesta, look at me." I turned my head toward him slowly, as though moving through something thick and resistant. His face swam a little in my vision, warm and worried, in a way I had not seen from him before, not the easy calm I had grown used to, but something sharper, more urgent, though still, even now, not afraid in the way I understood fear. "You're going under," he said. "I need you to stay with me. Can you talk to me?" "I am cold," I said, and the words came out slower than I intended, stretched thin like something melting. I know you are. I need you to fight that instinct, though, just for a bit. Your body wants you to shut down and conserve heat, but there's no heat left to conserve down here. If you go still, you're not resting, you're freezing." Every part of my training insisted that stillness was the correct response to cold, the same way warmth had always meant danger, but even as that thought formed, I found myself remembering, distantly, through the fog beginning to settle over my mind, that this had already been proven wrong once before. His warmth had not meant danger. Perhaps my stillness did not mean safety. "Help me," I said, and it cost me more than I expected to say it, some old, proud part of myself resisting the words even as my body begged for them. Corin did not hesitate. He pulled me by the arm toward a smaller side room, one of the emergency shelters built into the lower level for exactly this kind of failure, a space small enough to heat quickly if the main systems ever went down. Other crew members were already inside, huddled close together for shared warmth, their breath visible in the thinning air, their faces tight with cold, but none of them, I noticed even through my own fading thoughts, giving up. "We've got a portable heater," Owen called from the corner, "but it's barely holding the room above freezing. If the main system doesn't come back online in the next 20 minutes, we're going to have real problems." "Working on it," came a voice through the comm, tight with strain but steady, one of the engineers still fighting the failing reactor somewhere below us. Corin guided me down onto a bench near the small heater, and I felt distantly, my body's slow crawl toward that dangerous stillness continuing, despite the added warmth in the air, my own biology working against me even now, insisting that slowing down was still the answer, even as the very ground I stood on grew more dangerous by the minute. "She's going under," Owen said, crouching in front of me, checking something with a small scanner. Body temperatures dropping past safe range. If this were one of us, we'd call it hypothermia. For her, it's worse. Her whole system's built to shut down at this point, not fight through it. "So wake her up," Corin said. "With what? We don't exactly have a way to warm a Krillin fast. Everything we've got is built for human bodies." I heard this conversation as though from underwater, each word arriving a little late, a little muffled, and somewhere beneath the fog I understood, with a clarity that startled even my slowing mind, that I was going to lose this fight, unless something changed very soon. My thoughts kept sliding sideways into half-formed pieces, memories of cold rooms and careful calm, my whole life's understanding of safety rising up to reassure me that this slow fading feeling was simply rest, simply peace, simply the correct and natural end of a difficult moment. It would have been easy to believe it. It would have been so easy to let go. Then I felt his hands. Corin had knelt in front of me and pressed both of his palms flat against the sides of my face, his skin so warm against mine that for one disoriented moment my old alarm flared up one final time, screaming that this heat meant danger, meant an ending, meant something breaking apart nearby. But the alarm arrived late and weak, buried under the deeper cold pulling at me from every other direction, and for the first time in my life I let the alarm pass without obeying it. "Stay with me," Corin said, his voice low and steady, close enough now that I could feel the warmth of his breath as well as his hands. "I know your instincts are telling you to let go. I need you to trust me instead of them. Just this once." "It feels safe," I whispered, the words costing me everything I had left. "The stillness. It feels like the safest thing I have ever felt." "It's not safe," he said. "It's just familiar. Those aren't the same thing. You taught me that yourself, a few nights ago, remember? Unfamiliar isn't the same as unsafe. Well, I'm telling you now, familiar isn't the same as safe either." Something in those words reached me even through the fog, some strange mirrored echo of my own thoughts handed back to me at the exact moment I needed them most. I focused on the warmth of his palms against my face, forced my slowing mind to hold on to that single point of heat rather than sliding away from it, and for the first time in my life I chose warmth over stillness, deliberately, with whatever will I had left to spend. "That's it," Corin said, watching something in my expression shift. "There you are. Stay right there." Around us, the room had grown colder still, the small portable heater struggling against a chill that seemed to be creeping in from every wall at once. Owen was moving between the other crew members now, checking temperatures, wrapping thin emergency blankets around shoulders, his voice calm, even as his hands, I noticed, had begun to shake slightly from the cold. "Reactor team," he called into the comm. "How's it looking?" "Nearly there," came the strained reply. "Give us 5 more minutes." 5 minutes, in that room, felt like an entire lifetime. I sat with Corin's hand still against my face, watching the humans around me endure a cold that their bodies had never been built to withstand for long, and I understood, with a clarity that would stay with me long after that night ended, that not one of them had gone still. Not one of them had let their thoughts slow toward comfortable oblivion the way mine had tried to. They were shivering, teeth chattering, faces pale and tight with genuine discomfort, and every single one of them was still working, still speaking, still reaching for each other and for solutions, refusing, in some deep and stubborn way I was only beginning to understand, to let the cold decide anything for them. "How do you do it?" I asked Corin, my voice steadier now, warmth slowly returning to my thoughts along with feeling in my limbs. "How do you stay present through something that should be breaking you apart?" "Practice, mostly," he said, with the faint ghost of his usual easy smile returning to his face, despite the strain in it. "And stubbornness. A lot of stubbornness. We don't get to choose whether we're scared, or cold, or tired. We only get to choose whether we let that decide what we do next." For Tom. The reactor came back online with less than 2 minutes to spare, the lights flickering from dim orange back to their usual clean white, the heating system groaning back to life somewhere deep in the station's bones. I felt the first wave of returning warmth roll through the corridor outside our small shelter, and for once in my life I welcomed it completely, without hesitation, without any old alarm rising up to warn me away. Corin let out a long breath and finally lowered his hands from my face, though he kept one resting lightly against my shoulder, as though unwilling to let go entirely until he was certain I would stay steady on my own. "You did good," he said quietly. "You fought it. That's not nothing, you know, fighting your own instincts like that." "I did not fight alone," I said. "You gave me something to hold on to instead." "That's kind of the whole idea," he said. "None of us get through the cold nights by ourselves." "Not really. We just borrow a little heat from whoever's standing closest." I thought about those words long after the crisis had passed, long after the crew had dispersed back to their quarters and the station had returned to its usual gentle hum. I thought about a lifetime spent believing that safety meant stillness, that calm meant the absence of any inner fire, and I thought about how close that same belief had come to letting me slip away entirely in a cold, failing room, saved only by a warmth I had once mistaken for danger. Something in me had changed that night, something I did not yet have words for, though I suspected, lying awake long after the temperature had returned to its proper range, that I was never going back to being the Krillin who had walked off that landing deck 3 weeks earlier, alarmed by nothing more than the simple, steady fire of another living person's hand. I filed my report 3 days after the reactor failure, and it was nothing like the report I had originally set out to write. Sethrel read it in silence over our private channel, her expression unreadable in the dim light of her own quarters, while I waited, unusually anxious for some response. When she finally spoke, her voice carried none of the sharpness I had expected. "You are telling me," she said slowly, "that their instability is not instability at all." "I am telling you that I misunderstood the word entirely," I said. "I believed calm required the absence of heat, the absence of fear, the absence of anything that might disturb a body's rest. I have since learned that calm, for them, is not an absence of anything. It is a choice made again and again, even while the fire keeps burning underneath. That is a significant claim to build a report around." "I nearly died proving it," I said, more sharply than I intended, though Sethrel did not push back against the tone. "I went still in that failing room, exactly the way our training says a Krillin should when the cold grows dangerous, and it was the wrong response. If a human had not kept me anchored to warmth I did not trust, I would have slipped away entirely, convinced the whole time that I was simply resting." Sethrel was quiet for a long moment, and I could see, even through the thin static of the channel, that she was turning something over in her mind, weighing it against 3 decades of careful, cautious research. "This changes how we must approach every future first contact," she finally said. "If temperature alone is not a reliable measure of danger, then everything we have taught new liaisons for the past 30 years needs to be revisited." "I believe it does," I said. "I would like to be the one to help revise it." It was the first time in my career I had asked for something beyond the boundaries of my assigned duties, and I felt the strangeness of the request, even as I made it, a small, unfamiliar warmth rising in my own chest that I did not immediately recognize. It took me a moment to realize what it was. Pride, perhaps, or something close to it, a feeling I had rarely allowed myself, since pride, like heat, had always seemed dangerously close to losing control. Sethrel granted the request, though not without a final warning. "Be careful, Vesta," she said. "You have spent weeks learning to trust a kind of steadiness that is not your own. Do not lose the steadiness that belongs to you in the process. There is a difference between understanding another species and abandoning the one you were born into." I carried her warning with me for the rest of that day, turning it over the way I turned over most things now, slowly, carefully, without the old certainty that had once made every question feel simple. I found Corin later that evening, in the same observation deck where we had first begun to speak, as something more than colleagues, and I told him what Sethrel had said. "She's not wrong, you know," he said, leaning against the viewport, watching the stars the way he always did, as though they were old friends rather than distant lights. "You shouldn't have to become one of us to understand us. That's not really the point." "Then what is the point?" I asked. if not to become alike enough to understand each other completely. I don't think understanding works like that, he said. I think it's more like standing close enough to someone else's fire to feel its warmth, without needing to catch on fire yourself. You get to keep your own kind of steady. You just learn there's more than one kind in the world. I thought about this for a long while, watching the same slow turn of stars he was watching, feeling the quiet, careful cool of my own body beside the steady, constant warmth of his. It occurred to me, sitting there, that I had spent my entire life believing calm was a single, correct state, achievable only one way, through cold and stillness and the careful absence of anything that might disturb it. I had never once considered that calm might be a destination reachable by more than one road, that a fire could burn steadily instead of wildly, that stillness could be chosen instead of simply obeyed. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Always. When the reactor failed and the room grew cold enough to threaten all of you as well, were you afraid?" Corin did not answer right away, which told me more than an instant response would have. "Yeah," he finally said, "I was afraid. Especially watching you start to slip under like that. I didn't know if I could bring you back." "You did not appear afraid. I wasn't going to let it stop me from doing what needed doing," he said. "That's not the same as not being afraid. It just means the fear didn't get to make the decisions that night." I sat with that thought long after our conversation ended, long after Corin had returned to his own quarters, and the station had settled into its familiar quiet hum. I understood, finally, something I suspected Owen had been trying to tell me weeks earlier, in the medical bay, when he explained that humans did not always know right away whether their racing hearts meant fear or simple exertion. Their bodies lived inside a constant, unresolved uncertainty, a fire that could mean danger or could mean nothing at all, and they had built an entire way of living around choosing, again and again, not to let that uncertainty decide their actions for them. My own people had built our calm around certainty instead, a clear and simple rule: cold means safe, warm means danger, stillness means rest. It had served us well for longer than I could count, but I had seen, now, exactly where that certainty failed. A rule that worked perfectly in a controlled, familiar world became a trap the moment that world changed shape, the moment danger arrived wearing an unfamiliar temperature. I began, over the following days, to test small pieces of this new understanding in my own life, cautiously, the way one tests unfamiliar footing on a bridge that might or might not hold. I let myself sit closer to the station's warmer corridors, instead of retreating immediately to the coldest rooms available. I noticed, the first few times, the old alarm rising in me exactly as it always had, insisting that the warmth meant something was wrong. But I had learned, now, to ask the alarm a question before obeying it. Wrong with what, exactly? Wrong with the room, or simply unfamiliar to me? More often than not, lately, the honest answer was the second one. I spoke with Lucy one afternoon in the mess hall, the same room where I had once stood in the doorway listening to laughter I could not yet understand, and I found myself, for the first time, laughing along with something she said, a small, surprised sound that felt strange leaving my own body, unfamiliar in the same way warmth had once felt unfamiliar, though no longer alarming. "Look at you," Lucy said, grinning. "Didn't think I'd see the day." "Neither did I admitted. "Feels different, doesn't it? Letting go a little." "It does," I said. "I am still learning whether different means dangerous, or simply different. Take it from someone who spent her whole life running a little too warm for her own good," Lucy said, still smiling. "Different isn't the enemy. Different is just different. You get to decide the rest." I carried her words with me the way I had begun to carry so many small human phrases, folding them carefully into the growing collection of things I no longer fully understood but had stopped fearing. My reports to the council grew longer and stranger over those weeks, filled with observations that would have seemed, to my earlier self, almost embarrassingly personal for a formal scientific record. I wrote about the particular quality of a hand resting on a shoulder during a difficult moment. I wrote about the sound of shared laughter carrying down a corridor, and what it seemed to do to the tension in a room. I wrote finally, honestly, about the night a human's warmth had kept me from slipping into a stillness that would have looked, to any Krillin observer, exactly like peace. Sethrel called one final time before the council's official review, her voice carrying something I had never quite heard in it before, a kind of careful respect that felt different from her usual patient authority. "Your work is going to change how we approach every future contact," she said. "I want you to understand that. This is not a small thing you have done." "I did not do it alone," I said, echoing words I had heard from Corin more than once now, words that had slowly become my own as well. "I only learned to stop trusting an alarm that had never once been tested against something as unfamiliar as warmth. Someone else had to hold that door open long enough for me to walk through it." "Then perhaps," Sethril said, "the next report you write should include a recommendation, not simply about how we study other species, about how we might learn to sit beside their fires without losing our own." I promised her I would, and I meant it, though I did not yet know exactly what that recommendation would look like, or how much of my own steady, careful calm I still carried, and how much of it had already begun, quietly, permanently, to change shape around the warmth of a species I had once believed was simply, dangerously, burning itself alive. 6 months later, I stood at the edge of a different landing deck, on a different station, greeting a different crew, and I noticed my own hand reaching forward before the greeting ceremony had even properly begun. The delegation this time was not human. They were a species called the Orin, tall and quiet, their bodies running even colder than my own, their culture built around silence in ways that made even my people seem talkative by comparison. I had been sent as senior liaison this time, the first true test of the new approach Sethril and I had spent months building together, a framework meant to replace the old, simple rule that had nearly cost me everything in a failing, freezing room. "Temperature is a language, not a verdict." That line had become the opening principle of every training document I had helped write since that night, and I said it now, quietly, to myself, as the Orin delegate stepped forward to greet me. His skin, when our hands met, was colder even than mine, cold enough that my old alarm, the same one that had once screamed danger at Corin's warmth, now flickered awake in the opposite direction, whispering that something here had gone still, had stopped, had died. I recognized the alarm immediately for what it was. Not a fact, a feeling, built from my own history, reaching for a familiar shape in an unfamiliar situation. I did not obey it. "You run cooler than I expected," I said instead, keeping my voice even, curious rather than alarmed. The Orin delegate tilted his head, an expression I could not yet read, and answered in a voice as quiet as still water. "As do you, compared to the readings we took of the humans stationed near your outpost. We were told your species preferred cold. We did not expect to find a temperature that felt, to us, almost warm." "Temperature is a strange thing to build assumptions on," I said. "I have learned that the hard way, more than once. What feels dangerous to one body can simply be steady for another." Something shifted in his posture then, subtle enough that I might have missed it a year earlier, but I had spent 6 months since learning to read small movements the way Corin had once read mine, patiently, without rushing to conclusions. It was not fear I saw in him, it was recognition, the particular relief of being understood by someone who had clearly done this work before. The days that followed were easier than my first days with the human delegation had been, not because the Orin were simple to understand, but because I had finally learned the right questions to ask before I let my own body's alarms decide anything on my behalf. I watched their stillness carefully, noting where it matched simple comfort and where it edged towards something closer to distress, learning the difference the same slow, careful way I had once learned to tell a human's excitement from a human's fear. On the 4th night, a minor systems failure struck the new station, nothing as severe as the reactor collapse that had nearly taken me months earlier, but serious enough to send the temperature in the lower decks climbing higher than the Orin crew considered safe. I felt the old alarm in me stir again, quieter this time, questioning rather than commanding. Warmth, danger, the same ancient whisper I had carried my whole life. I walked toward the rising heat instead of away from it, the way Corin once had, the way I had learned, slowly and carefully, that steadiness sometimes meant moving directly into the thing your body had been trained to fear. I found 2 Orin crew members struggling near a failing cooling unit, their movements slower than usual, their normally still faces tight with something I now recognized, correctly, as genuine distress rather than simple discomfort. I did not hesitate the way I once might have. I reached out and rested a hand against the nearest one's arm, the same gesture Corin had once used on me, warmth offered deliberately, steadily, without apology. "Stay with me," I said, borrowing words that were not originally mine, though they felt, by now, entirely natural in my own voice. "I know the heat feels like an ending. It is not. It is simply unfamiliar. We are going to work through it together." The Orin crew members' breathing slowed, not from the temperature dropping, but from something steadier arriving alongside the heat, a presence rather than a solution, exactly the kind of anchor I had once needed myself in a small freezing room on the other side of known space. We repaired the cooling unit within the hour, and no one on that station came close to the danger I had once faced, though I understood, standing there afterward in the returning cool, that the danger had never really been the point. The point had been standing steady beside someone else's fire long enough for them to remember how to stand steady themselves. I wrote to Corin that night, a habit I had kept up across the months and the distance between our postings, describing the Orin delegation, the strange new lessons, the small, satisfying moment of reaching for warmth instead of retreating from it. His reply arrived the next morning, short and warm in the particular way his messages always were. "Sounds like you're doing exactly what someone once did for you," he wrote. "Just paying it forward. Proud of you, Vesta. Truly." I read that message more than once, sitting alone in my quarters, temperature carefully regulated, mind quiet, in the old, familiar way that had once been the only kind of calm I understood. But underneath that familiar stillness now sat something new as well, something warmer, something I had once mistaken for danger and had since learned, slowly, deliberately, to welcome instead. I thought back, as I often did in quiet moments like this one, to a landing deck months earlier, to a hand that had felt like it carried a small trapped sun beneath its skin, to an alarm that had gone off inside me and never fully stopped ringing, though its meaning had changed entirely by now. I had believed, once, that calm required the absence of fire. I understood now that calm could be built from fire itself, carried steadily, chosen again and again, offered freely to whoever needed a little warmth to keep from slipping away. She was calm until a human's body heat rewrote everything she knew. That had been true, once, in the frightened, uncertain days right after that first handshake. It was still true now, though the meaning of the words had shifted entirely, the way a single note changes its whole character depending on what comes after it. My calm had indeed been rewritten, not broken, not lost, only widened, made room for something it had never held before, a fire borrowed from someone else's steady, burning heart, now carried forward into rooms and stations and species Corin would likely never meet, passed hand to hand, warmth to warmth, exactly the way he had once passed it to me. I closed my eyes that night without any fear at all, neither of the cold I had always trusted nor the warmth I had once feared, and for the first time in my long, careful life, I slept the way I imagined humans must sleep, unafraid of the fire inside myself, certain only that whatever tomorrow required of me, I would meet it standing, steady, warm enough to last.